Welcome to the Compass Conversations podcast, a project of the Intuitive Learning Foundation. Every conversation here is organic. The opening topic isn't settled until 5 minutes before we hit record, and the rest is riffing off of each other's brilliance. Thanks for hanging out with us in a new paradigm of learning, teaching, and expansion where presence and mutually supportive conversation create the space to learn without having to be schooled. Please visit compassconversations.com to discover more about the podcast, or go to intuitivelearningfoundation.org, where we weave intuition with intellect to create harmony. And now, on to the next conversation. Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Compass Conversations. I'm Carrie Lake and I'm here with Andrew Freeman, Chloe Garrison, Greta Matos, Michael Gordon, and Joelle Dunlap. It's a special episode because this happens to be the board of directors and advisors for Intuitive Learning Foundation. It's just crazy exciting to share this group of people with you, to help everybody who's been following Compass for the 2 years that we've been alive, and people who are interested in seeing Compass stay alive, people who are interested in what ILF is up to and what we're creating in the world. This episode is going to give you an amazing and beautiful taste of the people and the consciousness that are guiding that project into life. So first of all, thank you everybody for being here. As we do, I'm going to read the invocation, excuse me, the invocation for Compass, and then dive into the starting point for what I imagine is going to be a rich and beautiful, expansive conversation today. These conversations are shared from our sense of connection, camaraderie, and love. This community of peers is curious to learn from and with one another, living, learning, leading by example. We're exploring together, acknowledging the interspecies family on this planet while lovingly including ourselves in the family of life from the heart, for the heart. Good thing that stuff can get edited out. So, in the 5 minutes before we started recording today, that's the time when, for every episode, we choose a starting point. And today, the couple of themes, or the couple glimmering lights that presented before we started recording, were about innocence in intuition. And I also heard an exploration that I think would be fun to illuminate about the word intuition, the words intuition and spirituality. Innocence, intuition, and spirituality. These are big words that can mean different things depending on context, depending on the speaker. And yet these are things that every human kind of has in common. And maybe it's not just humans that have it all in common. And that, to me, that's the fantastic exploration of ILF, is how can we assist humanity to know the part of ourselves that is already related to the rest of life, that we have in common with the rest of life. So as we get started, Michael, when we were talking before we hit record, you brought up a really beautiful point that intuition is felt. It's something that is felt. And not everybody relates to intuition in the same way. Not everybody would use the same words. And so I think a lot of people feel like they don't know how to listen to it. They're not sure if they're hearing it. Can you speak to that to start us off a little bit?
Yeah, and I'm heavily drugged at the moment
Heavily drugged on Benadryl. That's okay.
on Benadryl, so we have no idea what's going to happen here. There's I'd say two. I don't know. I'm going to say there are two places I could begin, and one is simply we'll call it the micro. Not that it's less important, but it's there is something arising right now, a feeling, let's call it a sensation, just a sensation. I can attach a lot of things to it. I can attach a word for it. I can attach, an emotion. Oh, that's a sensation. I like it. It feels wonderful. Or, oh, it makes me feel a little bit worried. And there's also the is this sensation a message of a different sort? So that's like called the micro. And that, I'm pardon me for closing my eyes. That's not the Benadryl. That's just how I think. Um, but I think these days when I have conversations, almost everyone I talk to, can have conversations with spirits or past beings outside of body beings. That's the crowd I hang out with. And I so appreciate this crowd. And yet, rarely have a chance to get sort of the down low. What does it feel like when, Greta, you're talking with your horse? A friend of mine told me that she was babysitting her dog the other day, and the dog said to her, um, when the owner came to pick it up, no, I'd rather stay here. And she wasn't exaggerating that. She was saying she heard it. And then at the more macro, so that's just like sort of the momentary stuff. It feels like there's a big intuition about wending our way through our life's course. And is this a point in our life's path where we see, oh, there really is choice here? And I don't mean a physical choice to make a physical move, for example, or start or end a relationship. It could be those, but there's a calling here. Again, that's not a one moment thing. So any conversation around that, um, I would find interesting. I'm curious. Yeah, so that was what was on my mind when I was roused from my drug fueled state.
Thank you, Michael. I think at this point, as I'm listening to Michael open the conversation a little bit, my heart wants to go straight to Greta. But that said, I know Greta and Chloe both have children aged 5 or under. Andrew works with kids of all ages, and Joelle works with people of all ages who operate at a level of innocence. And I'm feeling this upwelling in my body for how all of this is going to be brought into voice. I know I said Greta, but Andrew, you unmuted yourself. So would you like to jump in at this point? You want to?
well, I first just wanted to say if it could make me as insightful and intelligent as Michael, I would take Benadryl all the time as well. In fact, I think I might go reach for some. We're gonna watch Benadryl sales spike because of you, Michael. So anyway, thank you for sharing those thoughts. Yeah, it's so interesting really dealing with the question. And I think to me, this whole idea of feeling and intuition and the fact that we're all dealing with either animals or children or both, or adults who act like animals, I don't know, that basically we're dealing with the fact that we're not isolated systems. I think a lot of times we were brought up to think that way, like we're just contained in this body, we are this body, there's really nothing outside of it. And it sounds revolutionary to a lot of people. Like Michael, you're talking about like people listening to their animals or maybe their car or whatever from a different perspective. And I, it sounds like a radical concept, but it shouldn't be, because I don't think kids work that way. I was in one of our project rooms yesterday working with a kid for 2 hours who's made up this entire wild morphic field around dragons. He calls it the starbound path. And we were putting together a whole family tree for all the dragons and which dragon married which dragon. And one of them was 1,000,000.10 years old. And it was amazing. And he'd ask his sister, he'd be stuck. He'd ask his younger sister, well, what was the name of the dragon that married Featherford? She said, oh, well, that was Starlight. So it's like they're both tapping into the same morphic field. And all that just to say, like, I think the greatest thing we can do by this connection with animals and children is we can remember that we're not these isolated systems, and that we all have this amazing connection to these worlds beyond ourselves. And I really just love this whole notion. When I first heard the words intuitive learning foundation, I'm like, exactly, that's how we learn intuitively. When we learn through our head, weird things happen. We get all siloed and we get all egoistic about like what we know or don't know. But if we just open up and realize like, hey, this is all we the people's universe and information, and we're all tapped into it and we have our own way of expressing, then things just get so much easier and simpler. But yeah, I again just love this mission, and I love that we're looking to children and animals to teach us how to reconnect and remember who we really are.
So gorgeous. I could just keep listening. Go. You keep talking. Yes,
well, just give me some Benadryl, and then we'll see what happens.
Greta, go ahead.
Andrew, it's lovely to hear the thread that you've pulled, and I appreciate it so much because it brought to mind this story. And Michael, it also connects to what you're bringing in, because I've kind of taken to being very protective to like naming for a lot of people that intuition feels and sounds and is experienced so different depending on your particular makeup. And I know, Carrie, right before we jumped in, you brought in the point on language, and I think that also will come in at some stage. But I wanted to share this experience that just popped in mind as I was listening to you, Andrew, as you're talking about the fact that it's kind of this invisible connection that's like far exceeds our heads, right? And a couple of years ago, my family did a long ride, we call them a long quiet, but a long expedition where we live on horseback, and we travel and traverse territory for weeks or months at a time. And my husband and my daughter, she was a year and a half, she was 18 months old, and 4 of our herd members, horses, were all traversing this very remote region of Patagonia. And my husband and I, 9 years ago, we'd done a long ride just the 2 of us, with 3 horses and our dogs. And that was a very similar yet also very different experience, because we didn't have an 18-month-old that we were journeying with. And so time did very funny things differently the second time around. And we found that we were leaving much later in the day, because again, the time that it took to breastfeed and then get the horses ready and fewer hands, all of these things. So I had made kind of this silent, spoken commitment with my husband that we didn't want to leave camp later than 4 p.m. because we only had so many hours of daylight. We never knew where we would be able to camp and land with the horses. So it was always, we were always diving into the unknown. And if we left after 4, it felt like it would be too late. So we agreed. And one day we left at 5:30 and I knew it. And I was just like, well, it'll be fine. We're just going this short distance. We have information about where we're going. It'll all work out. Meanwhile, we get on the trail and it ends up being this totally different, mysterious adventure where things all go sideways quickly and things are taking a lot longer. And then all of a sudden we're in these pathways where the horses are even difficult to move through because they're so narrow. And at one stage I have to get off Blackie, who Sophia and I were riding. And as soon as I got off of her, she turned to me and she bit my thigh. And Blackie, she's never bit me. She's not a biter. And, you know, I literally live in the kind of nervous systems of the horses. And so the bite came out of nowhere. And the first thought that I had in my mind was, you knew better. You crossed your boundary. You weren't supposed to leave after 4. Like, we had this agreement, all of us. And I just knew. And she didn't even, it was literally like that bite on my thigh. We all know that we left too late. We all know why we're here. And I just like was filled with that knowing. And I didn't even resist the bite. I was just like, yeah, yep. I crossed my own boundary. And it just, but it, again, it was this essence of the commitment that was cross-communicated and everybody knew the agreement. You know, I mean, we're living and we're moving through those experiences together, feeling one another's bodies respond to everything that's happening. And so I just wanted to share that because that was like one of those like manifest, tangible expressions of the information that we agree to, what that other beings feel those agreements and interpret them, and it gets translated. And then there's accountability too, but it doesn't even have language. It doesn't need language.
Greta, you used the phrase, I live in the horse's nervous system, which I found pretty amazing. You got a few things to say on that. And I think I get generally what's going on, but I'd love to just hear you talk about that if you're willing.
Well, it's the level of attunement where I can sense like dysregulation in my own nervous system that's not related to my body. It's similar to a parent also basically lives in the nervous system of their child, right? Because we can feel the activation and things like that. And because I've lived so long and in so many long contexts with the horses, I embody that, or I can
So
feel it.
Let's. And I don't mean to steer this in the direction that I'm steering it, but I think it's relevant. So some people might say, if it were a human anyway, like with your child, there's a lot of empathic stuff going on there. You can experience the emotional tenor. I mean, your horse was upset. Your child communicates with you when it's upset. And so empathy has that quality where you can feel something. I'm just curious, is empathy a synonym? I don't think it is, but I'm just curious what you might say.
I receive it more neutrally. Mainly because I can feel hunger, I can feel restlessness, I can feel fear. And then because again, we work with the horses energetically, I can work with my nervous system to communicate and regulate. So pumas, for example, I can feel when the horse feels a puma, and I know that it's a puma, even though I can't see the puma or, you know, smell it, but I know it. That's the best way I could put it into words. But I'm not getting in any emotional conversation with the horse about the puma.
And you're not getting any sense of fear that the horse might, or extra vigilance, alertness that the horse might be experiencing. That's what I'm also inferring.
And I'll just take it to this context with the herd. I also am feeling, okay, basically I go into where are we going, like assessing the situation. So can we move? Can we get to a place where we're out of basically the bubble, the energy bubble that's triggered the fear? And what's that next step? That's kind of where my human partnership nervous system goes. Because again, I'm a predator, and so I have a different response to the puma's presence than the horse.
There's an entire aspect of this too that, so the first thing I want to say is what a beautiful description of the gift of being human, right? That our nervous system is going to take the information and the data through our sensory apparatus and process it in a what happens next way. And that lets us create. It also lets us project, and that we get to become accountable to ourselves to discover what the difference is. But the other thing I'm feeling and want to bring in is fascia as a sensory system, because when an infant or a child or an animal or even adults, when our state of being, our true authenticity is hunger, for example, that hunger it's going to create a unique state of being in that moment that is vibrational. Our existence is a feeling, it's a vibration. And our fascia is, as I understand it, and if anybody wants to correct this, please do, but our fascia actually exists not necessarily as connective tissue, but as the movement of a fourth state of water. And water in any state conducts frequency. So if my child is hungry and simply being hungry, then my fascia, because I'm so close energetically and physically, my fascia can pick up on that frequency, that vibration. And then my nervous system recognizes, oh, there's a frequency that's familiar to me. Let's translate it. Oh, hunger. Right? So we're sharing not just nervous system states, but sensing the ambiance of existence, of beingness. I am an infant being hungry. I am an animal being alert for a puma, because maybe the horse knows the feeling of a puma, and our sensory systems pick up on the awareness, on that vibration, because I am a horse being aware of puma. I'm a human being aware of horse, translating the information. For me, that's a description of how intuition, what we call intuition, functions through us.
That's really interesting what you're saying, Carrie, about our fascia. I'd also heard like as being part of our sensory system. It makes so much sense to me. And then also, I don't know if you've heard the same thing that I have, but Native Americans believed that when they cut their hair, they couldn't track animals as well, that their hair was a system of antennae, right? And it makes sense that just like the casing stones on the pyramid were there for a reason, probably for energetic reasons, we also have our own casing that's just really integral to our own energetic system and our interface with the beyond and with other beings too. So yeah, it's really, I really love that insight that you provided.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So then how does the idea of innocence, like being intuitive, being more like the animals, being more like children, is taking us greater to innocence? Joelle, would you speak to that a little bit? Because the people that you work with you often have no guile, no guise, no filter, we would say. And is no filter the same as innocence in our context here? I just would love to hear your voice on this. And you're
Um, you know, it on some level it seems like we're taking two opposing things, innocence and intuition, right? Because innocence could be described as this this clean not knowing, right? Just taking in information. And intuition, I think, Michael, you were talking about, sensing not being intuitive because sensing is just bringing in information, but intuition could be described as this this knowing, right? Taking in information and knowing, and that takes trust. But I don't think that they're opposed, this not knowing and this knowing. I think I think what happens, and Andrew, you spoke to this really early, and I think this is how my thoughts got here, is that you have this innocence of childhood or whatever that innocence is. And then at some point you get this adult notion of, well, that's a nice little notion, but you need to be doing something much more useful. And so we press all of our sensory information through this filter of what we should be doing. And now we've taken what was clean and now it's really muddy. And then we don't know, right? All we know is what we had of this innocence of being is now squished through this filter of, yeah, but is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And that's where innocence falls apart. And and getting back to that either personally or trying to preserve that in children, because we know when we're open, when we're in this clean innocent space, that's that broth of learning, right? That's where we're able to take in information, and and it doesn't mean that we can't think critically. It means it means we can trust ourselves. Um, Gosh, I got deep in the weeds, sorry. Um, and so, yes, there are people with developmental challenges whereby um, that filter of, what you're supposed to be doing, or this expectation that you're going to grow up and be a productive member of society, doesn't exist to the extent that it does for a lot of us. And as a result, I think just being in the presence of that innocence, whether it's children or whether it's people who don't have this guile, or whether it's being with animals, is so cleansing. Um, we just get out of that space between wrongdoing and right doing, right? And we're just in the field doing. Um, yeah, I think that about sums up my thoughts on the subject.
Thank you so much. You mentioned trust twice, and Chloe, I'm heading in your direction right now because you have twin 5-year-old girls, and I know you've been on a different kind of journey. Things have opened up for you differently in the last couple of years. I would love to hear you talk about trust, what trust has been on your journey with your girls through these changes, or take it anywhere you want. But that's where my curiosity went, listening to Joelle.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in the last 2 years, in the best way possible. But I think Joelle, well, let me go back and say I really resonated with what Michael said too, of not being in the space of communicating in the language of intuition. That's not has not been my I don't know what the word is, my wheelhouse for the last 40 odd years, until I got to meet Carrie. And then that door started opening. So I'm with you in that space. And then Joelle, to speak to you, just I love how you put it into words, that sensory information, as you know, that comes to us as kids when we have this innocence, and then it gets filtered through the shoulds, and then it gets muddy. And that, oh God, that resonated so well because it creates this internal conflict that you're living with then, because you still feel it. It doesn't go away, but you don't trust it because you haven't had a relationship with it. Nobody's taught you how to engage with that, how to understand it, how to trust it. And again, you end up living in this state of conflict of should, but discomfort, discomfort, discomfort. And so the kids, man, the kids, this kind of touches back on something Andrew said. The kids are a guide for me in that space because I can do the personal work on my own, which of course I continue to do. I'm curious. But the kids have really started to serve as a guide for me on that front because they are in that space all the time. And when I can get over myself, and I think what many of us go through is like a little bit of a grieving period for the experiences of the past, and wanting to undo that path that you've been on. And you open up to this space of curiosity, and then to be so blessed to have the two kids in my life right now, it's a guide. I mean, and then to have them home is just incredible because I can just lock arms and we go down that path of, you know, of innocent exploration, of curiosity, where I get to see that sensory content come through them. We get to explore it. It helps me recognize it within myself. So it's just this constant like weaving and unweave. It's just this magical tapestry that's being created, that's allowing me to get to know myself again on a totally different level than I even knew was possible. So I really see the kids and as a guide, and it's shifted my whole perspective on education, what the purpose of that is supposed to be. Gosh, I could just go on and on about that because this is just, it's just surfacing for me right now, in so many large, massive, colorful ways that it just wants to spew out at times. But so yeah, that's how that's all landing with me right now. Kind of a lot of a dump of of content, but yeah, I see the kids as guides right now on that front. So
If I could just honor what you opened for me, Chloe, is that awareness of the innocence, like our role as adults, actually, in our awareness of acknowledging, Joelle, what you brought in is that like the innocence is actually the space of trust. Like that's pure self-trust. And rather than the adult being the one to like hijack and like break the innocence bubble with all of this life experience, we actually have these spaces to really ground that intuitive sense of self and that self-trust that is almost like I feel myself almost creating this protective shield around my daughter in her self-awareness of that power of self-trust. Like if I know what I know, and that's in an innocent state. I mean, the children are in that all the time. They're not questioning what they know. They're questioning everything else. But it's like honoring that. And then that changes our role, right? That changes the way that we fill the space with them. Or it should, actually. I think that it should. It doesn't always, but it should.
No, I think it's so beautiful to hear you guys as moms of 5-year-olds, right? What's more innocent and maddening than a 5-year-old, right? And that we're raised to educate our children by systematically taking away that innocence and taking away that trust and saying, no, the stove is hot. No, this is dangerous. No, this is. But Chloe, I love just watching you. The term link arms, right? And that when you're around such innocence, you start to get permission to be and feel joy and trust, and that is a gift. And this notion to hop on horseback and go across some pretty gnarly places with your baby in your arms, and to homeschool, and Andrew, to commit your life to redefining education from this really dysfunctional place that education has become, is really an invitation, I think, to us, to innocence and to trust, and this permission for joyfulness that you only find in innocence, right? Because if you were very sophisticated, you wouldn't feel joy because it's a dangerous, crazy world out there, and there's so many things that you should do and so many ways that you're supposed to feel. So anyway, I'm grateful. This a fun conversation. So thanks.
I'll make a minor comment. The as you can probably infer, I don't have a 5-year-old at the moment. But when I did, I don't think there's danger per se in saying to one of my daughters, don't touch the stove. I mean, she could learn it by herself. You could touch the stove and really get a bad burn, but I don't think there's a danger in educating like in that instance. But I think where there's a danger, and I think this speaks probably to Drew, what you may be teaching in your school. I think where there's a danger is beginning to say we can begin to explain life and the quote unquote, very heavy quote unquote, the rules of life, the shoulds of life. And at first there's this sense, probably I'm a kid, oh, don't touch the stove. What's going to happen? I'm probably going to touch the stove anyway to see if someone was right. I mean, I stuck my fingers in light sockets. I wanted to see if there was electricity there. There was. But it's at the second level where we begin to forsake our experience and begin to feel certain experience. Oh, this isn't a good one. I shouldn't be having this experience, and not saying I'm having this experience. I think that's what schools, and I'm a disclaimer, I'm a former educator, so I'm guilty of this stuff, but I think many of us just follow nothing associated with values or compassion or those qualities that to me sort of belong in the direction of both innocence and intuition. So I just wanted to add that.
I'd love to add on some thoughts to this conversation. I think it's so fascinating, this conversation about innocence and the connection to intuition and and connectedness. And so when we lose our innocence, does that cut us off from our natural connectedness and take away from our, kind of I think about our intuitive connection as being a pipe. It can be really wide or it can be really narrow, right? So are we breathing through, a big snorkel or a little straw, right? In terms of that connection. And I've had some really interesting conversations recently about personality. The most extreme kind of personality is a narcissist, right? Who creates an entirely different identity, really to protect woundedness. And so I think when we're innocent as kids, we're okay with expressing our pain, and we're not self-conscious, right? And then something happens as we grow up, and people tease us, make fun of our insecurities, or ways that we might be different. And so we start constructing this personality around ourselves as a kind of shield against that. Like, people are making fun of me for not being very smart, so I'm going to prove how smart I am, or for being weak, so I'm going to lift a bunch of weights, or whatever it is, right? And so as we do that, we're getting further and further from our authentic selves, in a way. And we all do it, because we all have wounds and we all have insecurities. So we've built these pieces around us. And I think as we do that, and we're not our authentic selves, it by definition diminishes our intuitive connection. So I really believe a lot of the work that we do as adults, is to come to grips with our insecurities and be like, yeah, we're not perfect people. We are flawed. Or that, that we do work with our childhood wounds. We acknowledge them and we feel them. And then as we do that more, we can become our more authentic selves again, and increase that size of our intuitive pipe. But yeah, as we spend that time around children and animals, I guess that's why comedians warned us against following children and animals in our acts, because they are just so much more connected and intuitive. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I love spending time with kids. So it helps me remember as well. And I have a 13-year-old, so I've seen that progression of that pure innocence to, developing the personality, developing those forms of protection, as you move into adolescence. So I don't know, just wanted to throw that out there. I don't have any big epiphanies in terms of how we can really regain, other than continue connecting to who we really are, and connecting to those beings who still have that innocence and that lack of self-consciousness.
There's something that is presenting to me that I just find really interesting, and there's a connection there somewhere. Maybe this will tease it out, but Chloe and Greta, your girls are all about 5 years old, and Andrew, the people attending your school are generally age 6 and up, right? And it just makes me, for whatever reason, I just got curious, like, what happens between 5 and 6, like developmentally or energetically? It seems like that's a shifting point, right? So that, like, take that as the background for this next thing that I'm about to be curious about or talk about, with respect to what we call education, educating young people. To me, there's a fundamental skill with respect to nurturing the space for innocence, intuition, self-awareness, genuine self-expression. And the education is about, the word I'll use is discernment, which to me is an education to be aware of what the body is communicating, like Greta opened with. I can feel hunger in others. I can feel this weird because I know the feeling of Puma as well. So this feeling that translates through a firewall of what I might call fear or danger, and recognizing I'm not actually physically threatened right now. So it's a sensation. What is it? And this ability as a human to recognize the delivery of data and information and turn it into an understanding, that to me is under the big word discernment. And what if education were organized around helping young people function with that kind of discernment? We could call it intuitive discernment. We could call it knowing. But really, to me, what it looks like is getting to know our innate technology, how the stuff that comes factory installed is designed to function, and then how we as a being can relate to it. Our education system has not been set up for that. And yet, if education had that in mind, I wonder if we would have such a deficit of authenticity.
One thing, Carrie, that brings up for me, I love it. And it just reminds me of what would be different if the educator's role is not to correct the fact that the child's struggling with math, but instead is actually attuning to the fact that the child's frustrated and how the child's struggling and how does the child work with frustration and struggle, so that then the math can be something in the path, but actually the education is that guidance of how do you move through the path still in contact with yourself, and again your intuition too, and like not allowing that feeling of not good enough or not doing it right to cut you off from your self-trust, that innocence, of not knowing, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love the idea that self-trust is innocence. I love that. That feels so different. Please, yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, even taking it a step further, where you're saying like the education can be the guide, like if the kid's struggling with math, even taking it one step further, what if the child was the guide, and math doesn't really matter right now, that how much math do we really need? I was a math major in college and I've used almost none of it, right? Every once in a while I use a little bit of algebra or fractions, right? So maybe that frustration is like, I don't want to learn math. so we can like either negotiate like, well, you're going to learn math, so how can we make this work? Or, okay, we're not going to learn math. What do you want to learn? And I think that's, for most kids, that's a more powerful question. And they're going to learn math when they darn well want to, and see a reason for it. So I know it's radical versus like this framework that we've had, like, well, you have to know math, because if you don't know math, how are you going to get a good score on your college placement test? And how are you going to get into college if you don't do that? So, but yeah, I think so much of this is children have such a strong sense of guidance, because when they're pulled, like when they want to make a family tree of dragons, they'll work effortlessly on that for 2 hours. And the only reason we stopped is I was out of time. Like it would have gone on all day. So I really love letting the child be the guide, because they know what they want to learn, and then we can just be the ones like blocking and tackling and getting things out of the way for them and giving them resources and encouragement.
It's so beautiful. Just listening to you say all of that, Andrew, it made me really realize, the path of you are going to learn math as part of your life, and whether you use it, like it, or whatever, there is the aspect of it that if I am going to learn math, then I learn how to think mathematically. That's, I think, the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Educating a person about different ways to think about something, I think, is brilliant. It's actually been a huge part of my own world, because I had a dad who really preferred to feel nothing and piped everything through a very tiny intuitive hole. But what that did for me, and this is perhaps my uniqueness, is I learned how to be very flexible and have lots of different ways of thinking about the same thing. So, like, an education for how to think, I think, is a beautiful thing. But the way education has been set up has been by force rather than empowerment, and letting individuals guide their own education, like you're saying, by noticing what lights you up, and then what do you need to learn more about that. It might be like, I know one of your students is cooking, and so the mathematics comes in the need to learn fractions.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden they have mathematical thinking, right? I think this approach it would create an entirely different society, because people would be, you could call it specialists, specializing in mathematical thinking or engineering thinking or artistic expression, or whatever, rather than the notion that everybody should have the same kind of education. And setting up education in that way um, keeps the channel wider for people to have that self-trust.
Oh, I love that. It's all contextual, isn't it? Like, all of us know how to use Word and Excel or spreadsheets or word processing. How many of us learned it by reading the manual first versus just jumping in because we had to create a paper or we had to, balance the finances? So same thing. Kids are going to learn math, but it's going to be contextual, versus like, hey, I want to design a better skateboard, so these wheels need to be more efficient, or whatever it is, they'll learn the math to make whatever it is that's important to that happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to offer a slight note of dissent. I mean, mostly I agree
Great.
with what you said. We have, I guess it's Carrie mostly and Drew who've been saying this, and I'm aware of and a big supporter of efforts where they take some practical skill. And one of the skills I'm familiar with is trying to start a business. And they've taken kids who have no interest in school whatsoever. They come from terribly disadvantaged backgrounds economically, teach them how to start a business, which resonates to them because they want money and they have to learn these things, da, 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 da. So I am a fan of that in a big way. But I also think that there's some stuff that, you may not recognize that you need, and when you get it, it's like, oh my God. I mean, I'm thinking of two things. I used to hate walking in the woods because I thought it was stupid, and I had other better things to do, like doing sports and riding a bicycle, and who wants to walk in the woods? And then one day, a number of years ago, I walked in the woods and it was like, oh my God, who knew? So yeah, so that's one thing. And currently, like, I'm a piano doodler. I have moderate to maybe slightly better than moderate, music skills. I can hear stuff and begin to play it on the piano. I started taking lessons, and the guy who taught me is really, really good piano player, and he taught me all these chords I didn't even know existed, and I never would have found them. I mean, who knew there was, a G seventh with a flat ninth, augmented fifth. Okay, but it sounds really cool when you play it. So there is a thing going on where I think someone in good faith, I mean, I used to meditate a lot, self-guided meditation, and I loved it and it got me out of some terrific jams. And when I wasn't in a jam, which was most of the time, it did a lot of good. And then I've taken more recently over the past few years some pretty intensive meditation courses, and my meditation's at a different place. It serves me better. I serve the world better. So I think squashing, if someone says, I want to do art, I think it's ridiculous, of course, to say, well, you can't do art. Math is more important than art. That's kind of wrong. But I also think there's and disclaimer, I'm sort of like Drew, I'm a math nerd of sorts. And I taught at a professional school where I had no degrees, I had no training, I had no knowledge, but I was good at math. And it let me just sort of have a background to say, oh, this is pretty easy. Well, the stuff they're talking about, even though I don't know any of it. So I just sometimes think there's stuff that it's not for everybody necessarily. But if you want to live like in a Western context, as an example, and you might want to not be a farmer, and so you might have to work, it might be good to have some skills that are going to translate to some way that serves you and your family. End of, if that was that a rant, I hope it wasn't a rant, but end of whatever that was.
I think context is everything. So if instead of saying in an educational context, it's time for math, right? Math is just organized problem solving of quantifiable things. I was at a conference and Temple Grandin was speaking, and her current bent is that she has engineered some amazing solutions. In fact, some of the most compassionate solutions. And if anybody doesn't know, Dr. Grandin is a professor at Colorado State, and she designs slaughter facilities for animals to make the experience much less stressful for the animal, which is compassionate to the animal, and to the producer, it's more efficient and creates better outcomes financially. Um, and she does that because she believes that she can see and feel and sense things the way the animals do. Um, and she's designed these amazing facilities. However, she can't pass college algebra because that math is theoretical, right? It goes out of the tangible math, the arithmetic that she's very good at. And once we get into conceptual math, she can't do it. And so I think if we change the context educationally, and this comes from, me as the mother of a child who learned very kinetically and was a complete failure in school. He's 40 years old now, and we're still feeling terrible, terrible repercussions for how he was meant to feel at school as unable, as a failure. Um, if I toss someone a tennis ball with one hand and a golf ball with the other, that's advanced physics right there, right? I have to think about this hand has a little more dexterity than that hand. There's more mass over here. I need to get the arc over here. I need to cross over this way. So we're doing advanced problem solving in play all the time. And if we could give it that label, and if we could help someone understand, you just did like serious physics, like not math. We're talking like conceptual physics here in play, and that you are capable. and that you're doing it all the time and hopping from rock to rock across the stream. I watched dad do it and he has much longer legs than me. Ergo, I have to do it slightly differently. Also, socially, what happens if I just say, forget jumping on the rocks? And what happens if I jump into the middle of the stream really hard with both feet and splash the whole family? Like, what, what are the repercussions there, right? There's so many opportunities to build that basic literacy that we know that we need our children to have to survive in the world as we know it. And the thing is that it's changing very, very fast. Just by recontextualizing what happens normally in play and changing our perception that learning is natural, learning is normal, and that when we create and kindle curiosity, now we're making lifetime learners. Because, of course, we want our children to outlive us. That is our goal. And so we don't want them to burn themselves on the stove, but he's probably going to stick his finger in the light socket too. But when we create, we don't create it. When we encourage curiosity, we make learners. And when we make a context for the fact that that our kids are doing really amazing things in play that directly relate to educational goals, then we change the conversation. And it's a whole lot more fun to build family trees of dragons than it is to sit down and memorize the periodic table, right? We have in our pocket computers that give us access to all the great literature and all the great wisdom of the world right now. And when we create curiosity, they're going to find it. I could go off on this a long time. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop. But I just, as the parent of a child who was systematically robbed of his creativity, I am very, very, very passionate about this. He was told that he was lazy, that he was stupid, that he, wouldn't, couldn't, shouldn't, all these things. And all he needed to do was touch it and feel it and be told that he's able. And so I get really passionate about this. And he did have some fantastic teachers. I will give him that. But he had some real shit ones too. Damage is tremendous. And it's a big passion of what we do to take people who think differently and show them that their minds are different and that we need those different minds in order to be part of this new world. So I'm going to mute myself now. Sorry, because I can go on.
Oh, no, sorry, Joelle. Thank you so much. It's so beautifully said, and I absolutely adore your passion. And that recontextualization, the way that you're talking about it, really is what's behind Intuitive Learning Foundation, is not to just create another system that says, here, now you should learn intuitively, right? But really to recontextualize education, to recognize that while I'm doing advanced physics by reaching and catching the tennis ball, my innate technology already worked and solved all of those problems, and we can call it intuitive. My intuitive response was to reach with my dominant hand, to calculate the distance and the arc and the wind and all the things. And if I let it drop, is that socially acceptable or not? And all that stuff. What we realize as intuition is already doing all of that. So I just wanted to pause there because, yeah, Greta, we're just past our hour. Usually the episode is just an hour, and I needed to ask if anyone has a hard stop. So unless anyone has something pressing they want to add into the recording, I think maybe that might be a good stopping point. What do you guys think?
I just had one other thought, and that is, to me, we've had a couple of different themes here. We've had, developing from this place of, our unique genius. So every kid is unique. Every kid has a unique way of thinking. Like Joelle, you were talking about your son, just thinking a little differently. And I would say we all think differently. So we're all unique. And so there's that developing of the part of us that's unique, but we all know geniuses who are horrible with their finances, or they're horrible with people, or they're horrible with their health. And so kind of going back to you, Michael, I think you're absolutely right. There are these key life skills that serve all of us. How do we balance a checkbook? How do we feed ourselves? How do we take care of our bodies? How do we stay emotionally really well balanced? And so I think of those as key life skills. And I do think that's a really good use of education and school. And for the most part, we figured those things out for ourselves when we were adults. So why not teach those things to kids? But at the same time, really raise these geniuses who know their genius and it's well developed, but they also know how to interface really well with the world. And I really think that's our challenge, is to be able to, work with both sides of that equation.
Thank you so much. Yes. It's so exciting. Greta, do you have anything else you'd like to say or add, or I think we're at a point of wrapping up for today.
No, nothing else to add for today's conversation other than just my deep gratitude. It was really delicious and a lovely winding, meandering, and I feel like it also grounded like the innocence and self-trust and that awareness too of how that gets integrated into the emergent restructuring, reshaping of education, like in a way that's honoring, in a way that a child can authentically feel that their innocence is valuable and actually is worthy of protection because it's going to be powerful later in life.
Back to the power versus force, right? Innocence really reveals and it makes true power accessible, I think. And then we get to receive an education for how to wield it, how to be it, how to share it, how to recognize it in ourselves and in others. Thank you all so very much. I look forward to seeing us all together in August for a board meeting. So yeah, thank you. We'll be in touch, and Chloe will be in touch.
Thanks, everyone. So lovely to spend the time with you.
Thank you all for creating this episode.
Michael,
such a pleasure and honor to be part of the group.